Hey, Sheri, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Thank you. How are you doing this evening, morning, afternoon, wherever in the world you may be? How are you doing, my friend?
Doing awesome and super thrilled to have you on the show. You are the author of an exceptional new book that we can't wait to tell everybody more about. It was a great read, and that's why we had to have you on the show because we want everybody to know about exponential living and how they can begin to apply that to their life. But before we get into your insight and your wisdom, can you just take a moment and introduce yourself to everybody that's listening and let them know what you're all about?
Yes, hello. I am Sheri Riley. I am a wife, a mother, a daughter, an entrepreneur, and an author. And we all know that is not easy. But I have figured out how to make it simple. Through my 9 principles of exponential living, I've learned how the power of pursuing peace, choosing clarity, and living courageous engages us and empowers us to stop spending 100% of our time on 10% of who we are. And I've been on this journey really all my life, but very intentional about really determining and figuring out what that how is for the last 16 years. So my book is the how. How do we stop spending 100% of our time on 10% of who we are? And I'm just excited to be the messenger to really help people transform with that message.
Now, you alluded to it. Exponential living is, an amazing sounding concept. So where did the concept come from and what made you turn this experience, this journey that you've been on into a book?
Yes, so I'm from a small town in Kentucky, and I had this big dream of working in the entertainment industry. But I'm going to date myself. This was before the internet. This was before there was an music industry in Atlanta. But I had this vision and I had this dream. And so this was when I was about 14, 15 and, went through college. And in college, I was still pursuing this dream, graduated from college, still pursuing this dream. About 8 years later, I ended up in Atlanta working at LaFace Records. So I had my dream job. I mean, this was everything I dreamt about. I was working with and creating amazing marketing strategies for artists like Toni Braxton, TLC, Usher, artists that were revolutionizing music and the music industry. I had an unlimited expense account. I was barely in my mid 20s, bought my mom a home by the age of 27, six-figure income, right? Like all of those things. And I was miserable. I was miserable. I realized that this amazing career that I'd worked so hard for had narrowed my life down to this small 10% of who I was. And so when I resigned, I started on this journey of thinking just for me, like, how do I truly gain the rest of who I am? And I really felt like I was an anomaly. I felt like this is just my truth. But over the course of a few years, several of my friends and colleagues began calling me saying, Sheri, I've got, making $500,000 a year. I've got the purse, I've got the home, I've got the cars, but I don't have a life. And I see what you're doing. Can you just help me out? And I realized that these things, these principles that I was living, they were helping my friends as well. And really what shifted it for me is several of, colleagues and friends began to really make life damaging decisions because they were realizing that these great careers wasn't fulfilling. They were great, we had great access, but they weren't fulfilled. And I knew that I had to really package this journey, package these principles, because more people needed this message than just me and my circle of influence.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you have the great saying on the cover of your book and throughout the book where you warn and teach us to stop spending 100% of our time on just 10% of who we are. Can you kind of elaborate for everybody to kind of get where you're going there?
Yes. So a few years after I resigned, I did start another business, which I had for 17 years called Glue. And one of my clients was a mentee of mine. Well, it was the record label, Equipment Eye Records, that Outkast owned. And the director of marketing was one of my mentees. And so one day we were meeting, and I could tell she just didn't have the energy that she normally had. And she began to really share with me, like, Sheri, I don't feel like myself. Things are just kind of off. And in the midst of this conversation, it was the first time I ever said, okay, well, basically, you're trying to find 100% of your fulfillment in 10% of who you are. And I said, you really have to stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are if you really want to find all of your fulfillment. And immediately, like, we knew, like, it was like lightning struck, like, oh my God. And that was 16 years ago. And it still has that same impact. So that was the first time I said it, but it literally impact person after person. It has that impact. I just did Steve Harvey's show, TV show, and he literally was like, the subtitle is everything, right? It says it all. And it resonates with so many people, regardless of, where you live in the world, whatever your socioeconomic background is, your culture, your nationality, your age. It really does speak to the core of what so many of us struggle with.
Yeah, and what I think is great about your book, one of the many things that's great about your book is that your principles throughout your writing, you're addressing the pro athlete, the corporate exec, and you're addressing the stay-at-home mom. You're covering the whole spectrum of people, and no matter where you are, you could easily find yourself trapped in that cycle of focusing on just a piece of who you are as a person. So if people are listening to you right now and they're kind of intrigued by what you're saying thus far, how can they evaluate themselves to see if perhaps they are doing that, focusing 100% of their time on just 10% of who they are?
Well, the good thing is we always know. We always know. I never let my clients say, I don't know. Because the reality is we know. Now, we may not be ready to accept it. We may not be ready to be accountable to it. We may not be ready to make the changes. But the reality is we know. We know if we wake up every day and know that only a portion of who we are is being realized. We know that if we're worried about tomorrow, stressed about yesterday, confused about what's next, if we know if our relationships aren't really fully enriched because we're, even though we're in the presence of our family and friends, we're not present, right? And so even if we're not clear what to call it, right? Even if things feel like, oh, I'm okay, I've got, this is going right, this is going right, we definitely know that there's other areas of our life that we want to be engaged with, but we just don't feel like we have time. And so any of those signs, lack of clarity, overwhelmed, overworked, if you're constantly busy, but you're not productive, if you always have that inkling that, oh my gosh, I wish I could, well, you can, right? And so those are some of the telltale signs. Or if you really know that you just always saying, I don't have enough time, that is really the one of the biggest red flags right there.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been helping people, coaching people through this process for a number of years now. So looking back over your career, what are some common mistakes that you see people making that is causing them to not be able to live exponentially?
Fear of what am I missing? Fear of the idea that money represents the totality of success. Fear that if I don't get to that certain title, that means that, I'm not worthy if I didn't reach that title. And so you can call it many different things, but at the heart of all of them, it's fear. It's fear that I won't have the security, or fear that I won't, what's that word I'm looking for? Measure up to the idea of what someone else says I should be or do. And then the fear or this narrow definition we have of success. We narrow success down to just what we have in our bank account or the title we have in front or behind our name. And so when we narrow our success down to these small, minute realities of who we really are, it definitely minimizes the expansion of the life we could live. So there's several others, but the main two is fear and then having a narrow definition of success.
Speaking of success, one of the things that I've said and that you also reinforced when I was reading your book is the importance of personal development. A lot of people are praying and asking God, for promotion and elevation, but they're not necessarily focusing on developing themselves as a person. Can you kind of speak to the importance of personal development when it comes to success of any sort?
Personal development fuels our professional growth. It is, it fuels it. And so many companies now are really beginning to recognize that, personal development is just as important as diversity training and IT training and leadership development. I'll give you one quick story to kind of highlight it. I have a client and we're working on business development. We're working on growing their business, right? That is our focus. But what we realize is that there is this idea that was cultivated in, around their preteen, teen years that they don't have options. And so this idea, this paradigm, this ceiling was cultivated through some, real life situations, nothing tragic, just the perception that a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old would take from these different life experiences. And so a reality, a cap was created that just kind of said, options are limited for this particular person. And so it was in our work that we were doing personally that allowed us to uncover this. Well, when you think about a person as trying to grow their business, right? If they have a personal challenge that says you don't have options, well, there's a direct conflict with that. And so we could have done all kind of leadership training. We could have done all kind of courses in business development. We could have done all kind of consulting work around how to build their sales strategy. And all of that would have been great, but it wouldn't have moved the needle because none of those were the real issues. The real issue was if you don't feel like you have options, then you're not going to do the things that you need to do to grow your business. And so that's just one example of where personal development fuels our professional growth. I really love, there's many companies now that are really starting to recognize that health and wellness is not just diet and exercise, that it's also our psychological and emotional being as well. And so I say all the time, what happens between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. directly affects how productive we are between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. And so I'm adamant. And that's why I say I'm a life strategist. I'm adamant about the full body, the personal and professional. I don't separate them. They're really all one. So that's why I focus on being a life strategist. So we really do look at the whole person.
Love reading, but wish you had more time to get into your favorite books? What if you could use the time you already have and listen to the books you already love? Well, now you can with Audible. With Audible books, you can be inspired, entertained, and educated anywhere, anytime. Choose from the bestsellers in self-development, business, nonfiction, and more. So what are you waiting for? Your first 30 days are free. Visit hisandhermoney.com/audible to get started today. That's hisandhermoney.com/audible.
And I know a lot of people, self included, I'll admit it, we battle balance. We have responsibilities at work, responsibilities in the home, responsibilities at church. You're trying to be a good husband, a good spouse, a good parent, a good employee. And you're always battling yourself. Like, am I spending enough time here? Or am I cultivating this relationship properly? But you teach that balance is somewhat of a myth. So can you kind of talk us through that a bit?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I do not believe in balance. Because think about it. Not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Louisville for a book signing. I graduated from the University of Louisville and I was there for a book signing. My sorority and my alumni at the University of Louisville was hosting me. And so this was a big deal. This is my sorority, where my home chapter, Xi chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, my alumni, the University of Louisville. This was a homecoming. This was exciting. Well, while I was in Louisville, I live in a different city. My daughter was sick, right? And so balance would say, oh yeah, you can balance that out. You can be in Louisville and take care of your baby. That's not real. No, you can't. Now, what I could do is integrate, right? What I can do is make sure that life is effectively, I'm giving effective energy and time and the appropriate measures to those many things. But to say I can balance them at the same time, or things are going to equal out, is not real. The last maybe 8 weeks that I've been focused on my book launch, that's where the majority of my energy has been. So I can't balance that. Now, what I can do is, now it's time to shift. It's time to shift that time that I was putting towards launching the book. Now I've got to shift that time into other areas of building out more content and building out other programs. And so when we look at life as a balance, we're going to constantly lose. But when we look at how do we integrate, how do we fully create spans of time, whether that's a day, whether that's a week, whether that's a couple of months, that we're able to fully engage on those things that are maybe dictating a little more time. So I fully believe in integration, but never balance.
Okay. Awesome. I love it. I'm going to try it.
Calendar. Here's the thing. What's on your calendar is where you'll put your time. So if you really want to have productive time, make sure it's on your calendar. If you want to know where a person is most committed, look at their checkbook, quote unquote. We don't have checkbooks anymore, but where they spend their money and where they spend their time, that's where they're committed.
Love it. Now, throughout your book, Exponential Living, you have these segments that I love called Exponential Conversations. Kind of talk everybody through that concept portion of your book and share with us one of the ones that impacted you the most.
Oh my God, that is some of the favorite content for me in the book. I was very intentional. The idea of exponential living is pretty complex, right? We're dealing with some very complex issues when you talk about, full life integration, or as most people would call it, life work balance. When you look at, people who are burned out, they have, these massive careers and they're burned out. And so you're dealing with really complex issues. And, but exponential living is very simple. It's not easy, but it's very simple. Pursue peace, choose clarity, and live courageously. And so because the ideas of the things we're dealing with, the life issues are so complex, but the remedies for it are very simple. I knew that people needed real life examples, and I wanted people to really experience, the fullness of these principles through people who truly represented the principles, who were living it. And so I'm going to tell you something interesting. I didn't prep anyone before the conversation. I didn't give them any information. I didn't tell them what exponential living was, because that's something I made up. So no one knows what it was, right? I didn't tell them what the principle was, nothing. I didn't give them any information. And when you ask the question, which one stood out or which one had the most impact for me, I'm going to tell you all of them, and I'm going to tell you why. All of them had an impact on me because every last one of those conversations, when I asked them the questions, they answered exactly the information that was in the principle. When I asked Caesar Mitchell about living in your power, he literally talked about perspective and ownership and wisdom and decision making. When I talked with Will Packer about, stop working and start maximizing, he talked about the elements that are in that principle. And it happened on every last one of those principles without fail. No prepping, and they all said exactly what was in those principles. And so that was confirming and affirming for me But it made all of those principles and those exponential conversations so uniquely powerful because it really affirmed that the message was genuine, it was authentic, and it worked. And so I think those conversations are so powerful because they really do give you that real life experience that it works. If you work it, it works.
Absolutely. Now, if somebody is listening and they're evaluating as you're talking and as you're teaching, and they kind of realize, you know what, I'm not really living exponentially. Like, what are a couple of things that they can do to kind of get the ball rolling in the direction of exponential living?
Well, the first thing they have to do is get the book. They have to either get the book, the ebook, or the audio book, right? But here's the top three things that I always recommend is one, we have to really, truly make a decision. So many of us are just in a habitual lifestyle. We know we're miserable. We know we're not happy. We know we're not fulfilled. We know we're not living up to our potential. We know that we need to shift that career. We know it's time to launch that business, start that nonprofit. We know it's time to get off of that volunteer board and that volunteer board so we have more time with our family. We know all of that. But we don't make a decision to make the changes that we need to make. So the first thing we have to do is make a decision. The second thing we have to do is give ourselves permission to live into a new norm. So many of us don't make the decision and don't make the changes because we don't know what's on the other side. And we need to just give ourselves permission to either try it, and if it doesn't work, okay, course correct. But guess what? More than not, we're going to find an even greater who we are on the other side. So we have to give ourselves permission. And then the third thing is something that my dear friend and mentor, John Maxwell, says is we've got to be okay with the fact that we're going to give up to go up. We're going to give up to go up. For me, those 3 years I spent at LaFace, my time was up there. Working at a record label was one of my dreams. I also wanted to be an entrepreneur. But so many of us stay in a pattern in our lives long after our season has passed because we don't want to give up what we know to gain something that could be even greater on the other side. So we have to be comfortable that there are going to be things that we have to give up to go up. So those would be the three things that I would say is a great place to start.
Yeah, and I love that last point. I love how you crystallize it by giving the illustration of it's like with college. As great as our time was in college, there was a graduation date and it was time to move on. But like you said, when we move into adulthood, we don't allow ourselves to graduate and transcend the season and move on to the next. So I love that analogy. That really, really brought it home for me. Now, looking back over your career, I mean, it's been a storybook career thus far. What's been the biggest life lesson that you've taken away from everything that you've gone through?
Now, I'm a woman of faith, and my biggest life lesson is, when you trust God, when you genuinely, truly trust God and really believe that He is fighting on your behalf, you really can live in a place of peace, clarity, and courage. And so my biggest takeaway on this journey is that when the three things that I talk about with this book, when you pursue peace and when you choose clarity, it gives you a power that you can make any decision, overcome any obstacle, and live fully in any of life's circumstances with courage. So my greatest life lesson is really those three things: peace, clarity, and courage.
If there's somebody tuned into the show who really loved what you had to say, they kind of see themselves in various parts of the teaching that you're giving, but they're unsure if they have what it takes personally to live exponentially, what words of encouragement would you offer to that person?
I would definitely say that you are looking at a woman who is literally who you are. I tell people all the time, I'm not special. I am not special. I just truly believe and live these principles. And so the one thing I would say is don't think it's beyond you. I can't do that. Well, yes, you can. And where it starts with is just making one decision. You know, when we try to lose weight, if we say, I'm going to lose 100 pounds, we never lose 100 pounds. But if we say, I'm just going to stop eating French fries, and we stop eating French fries, and then we add something else to it. And so I would just say, I'm not special. I'm just someone that really every day gets up, and I say at the end of the book, I don't live this every day. I'm not perfect with it, but I never said you will have peace and you will have clarity and you will be courageous. I say we're pursuing peace. We're choosing clarity and we're living courageously, because every day we have to make that decision that those are the things that we're going to focus on. So I would just encourage you to just start and trust and believe the process.
Awesome. Now, can you tell everybody a little bit more about what they'll learn in your new book, where they can pick up a copy, and how they can connect with you?
Yes, so you are going to learn the how. How do you stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are? It's available everywhere books are sold. I did an interview 2 nights ago with a young lady in Malaysia who actually bought my book in a Malaysian bookstore, a bookstore in Malaysia. I just saw a post, a young lady in Canada just did 2 blog posts on Exponential Living. So the book is sold wherever you are in the world, listening to this, watching this, everywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available on ebook, audiobook as well, so iTunes and Audible, Kindle. So it's available. And then please, I would love to connect with you. I would love for you to join my Exponential Living community. You just go to SheriRiley.com. So SheriRiley, SheriRiley.com. And that's the same for Instagram and Twitter. And then Facebook is Sheri Riley, DOTCOM, and it's spelled out, SheriRiley.com. So that's the same for Facebook and YouTube. And I would love for you to join my community and love to stay connected.
Sheri, this has been incredible. We know that our audience took good notes, and now they're evaluating themselves. And I'm sure they're going to pick up your new book so they can start the process of exponential living for themselves. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share this with our audience today.
Thank you. And can I just add one final note? I just want to tell everyone, peace really is our power, and peace really is possible, and peace is the new success.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.